All right, so for starting seeds, I have a tray here that I buy the trays that have the slots in them so that any extra moisture can go off. You can also get the ones that are closed, and that way the extra water that drains off of here when you're watering your seedlings will just kind of gather in the bottom of that. There's a few different types that you can use. You know, I've tried them all. They all kind of work for the same purpose. So each one of these is a 6-cell tray. And then this whole little tray thing here in the full size is going to be 72. So 72 different plants that we can start. If we just put one seed in each, you can do multiples also. So I have some seed starting mix here, and this we just buy it locally from our local feed and seed store. Some people pre-moisten their germinating mix. You can see how light and fluffy it is. Really, really fluffy. So even the smallest seeds will germinate fine in this. I don't pre-moisten it. I just kind of pack it in here. Push it down with my fingers. When it's super light and fluffy, you really want to make sure that you're packing it in. Otherwise, it's a little too loose sometimes. Even if your seed grows, like you get a little seedling here, when you go to take it out to transplant it either into the ground or to a bigger pot, it kind of just falls apart because it's kind of loose. So I'm just going to pour the germinating mix in here. Squish them down. And then top off again. Just keep in mind that when you water this in, it is going to sink it down a little bit more. So you always want to either pre-moisten it or just pack it in really good when it's dry like I am. All right, so I'm just packing these guys in, and I know it's going to fall down a little once I wet it, but I like to wet it before I add the seed, because what happens is if you like center the seed right in the middle and then you water it, sometimes the seeds can shift around, especially if you're sowing multiples in each one of the cells. So just going to give it one quick little top off, and then let's water this down so we can get ready to sow some seeds. All right, so now I'm just going to water it in with my hose or whatever watering can you have. Try not to overflow it. I like to kind of just go back and forth like this. Then I'll let that water seep in, and then I'll go back and water a couple more times while I let everything absorb into the germinating mix. All right, and usually, since this big tray is slotted, you can see all the water draining out. That usually means that they're all really well saturated and any excess water is draining out the bottom. I'm just gonna go pack these in a little bit more. Make sure each cell is nice and wet down. And then I'll grab my seeds and some markers. You can use plastic ones that you write on, or I use little popsicle sticks that I write on. That way I can mark each little 6-cell bundle with exactly what seeds I'm planting in them. All right, so before we start sowing some seeds in this prepped germinating tray that we've just done, I have a couple other ones that are at varying stages, and so I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about timeline with you. It's all going to matter a lot about like what the temperature is and what types of seeds you're growing. I live in North Central Florida, and at the end of February, first week of March, I mean, we can have temperatures in the low 30s, and we can have temperatures in the 80s. So it varies a lot here. So every week or so I try to, you know, seed and plant one of or two of these trays just with different things. So this one here is 6 days old, and you can see that not everything has sprouted. I'll go through and mention some of the ones that have already sprouted. Eggplant, some bush beans here, a contender variety that I like to grow, tomatillos, some basil. These are orange bell peppers that haven't yet sprouted here, some eggplant that I can kind of start to see just sprouting now. And so these are all warm weather crops for my area. Now that the weather's a little bit warmer, this past week we did have 2 nights where the temperatures went down to the 30s. That probably held back some of the other crops in here from actually germinating, but some of these other ones are already nice and big. So this is a zucchini variety, and this is a Chinese long bean. So 6 days, You can see varying because I have different types of crops, so they're not all big. And then this one is 7 days since I planted. So I did this one the day before I planted that one. And this has more zucchini, pumpkins, squashes. Here I have tomatoes. This is a green zebra variety, and all of these have started to sprout already. More zucchini, some gourds have not sprouted. And then this is a corn, a blue, like a flower corn, a Montana lavender clay corn that has sprouted. I don't usually grow corn, but it was a crazy cool color variety, and I thought, why not? I'll try to put a couple of these in. Then if we come over here, we'll see another tray that is about 3 weeks since I sowed the seeds in it. And you can see I need to start getting some of these plants out of here and transplant it either into larger 3 to 4 inch pots or directly into the garden. So some tomato plants, and this is a good, 5 or 6 inches tall. And so you can see how long, from 1 week, 2 week, and 3 week, this is kind of how the plants are looking. So depending on what the weather is like when your plants get to this size after 3 or 4 weeks, you can either put them directly into the ground or keep transplanting them into a slightly larger pot to get them out of these smaller 6-cell trays. But that's a quick overview of my germinating trays. Now let's grab some seeds so I can show you how I plant them in the prep tray. All right, so we are sowing some seeds in here. This is a Waltham butternut squash variety.
This is the bush bean right here.
So provider bush bean, we're going to put some green beans in here. The back of the packet will usually tell you, but I like to just gauge it by burying it about twice as deep as the size of the seed. So these are the beans. And so some people kind of soak these overnight. We don't tend to do that. As long as the soil is really damp and good and we keep it wet, then it tends to be fine. So for this size, I usually will bury them about 1/2 inch deep. And there's no real exact science. You just don't want to bury it like 2 inches too deep. And then the seed won't be able to germinate. But either way works fine. Here you go. I only have one hand, so you can. And after we have the whole tray filled up and marked, so I'll show you what I do. I get these little craft popsicle sticks, and I just split them in half. And with a little black pen, I just write what the variety is. I don't have to write bush bean because I know provider, since we grow this one often, I know what it is. So this one I put Waltham butternut squash. So that's that one. Here we have a sugar baby. This is a watermelon variety that we sowed in there. So that's good. And then after the whole tray is full, we'll go ahead and top it off with a little more germinating mix. Remember, when we watered it in, you see how the soil tends to sink down? And then we'll water it in a little bit more. And that's it. I'll put it right back in the greenhouse and wait a couple days and make sure that it stays nice and damp while we keep it in the little greenhouse until they germinate. All right, so now that we have one of our trays fully seeded and labeled, I'm just going to bring it into the greenhouse and leave it right here. And then I'll just check it every day or two to make sure that the soil on top, once it starts to feel a little bit dry, I'll just kind of mist it a little bit. You want to keep them nice and damp, but not overflowing and saturated with water. Then, sometimes the seeds can just rot instead of germinating. So it's kind of like finding that fine balance between keeping the soil damp with the heat. It's in the 80s right now here, so I don't need to do anything else. That's going to be plenty warm to help those seeds germinate. And I just want to make sure that the soil itself does not dry out before the seeds get a chance to germinate. So I'll leave it there, and I'll check back on it in 2 to 3 days.